Hello and welcome to this BBC News special programme dedicating the next hour to the Air India plane crash which has killed more than 200 people. Over the coming hour, we will report extensively from Ahmedabad and across the world, with our correspondents getting reaction from those impacted, as well as looking at the wider implications of this disaster. Well, police say more than 200 people have died in the crash. That's passengers and those on the ground. These pictures, verified by the BBC, show the moment the Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner came down. You can see the jet losing altitude above a built-up area close to the airport's runway before then disappearing from view. Well, shortly after, a huge explosion can be seen. Well, flight AI 171 was due to fly from the city in the west of India to London's Gatwick Airport, arriving at around 6:25 British summer time. The flight was recorded picking up speed at around 1:34 in the afternoon local time. That's around 9 a.m. in the UK. The aircraft started to climb, but the last signal was sent just 4 minutes later at around 1:38 local time. Air traffic control say they received a mayday call from the plane, and that was the last contact before the crash. Local police say the plane hit a hostel that was housing doctors in a residential area close to the perimeter of the airport. At least 50 medical students have been taken to hospital, with others and their relatives also missing. Pictures from the ground show pieces of the Boeing's jet fuselage and tail sticking out of buildings, and wings and wheels lying in the wreckage of damaged and destroyed buildings. Well, our correspondent Yogita Lamai has been at the scene of the crash and sent us this update.
Several hours since that crash took place, you can see there's a tree that has been upturned and is still smoking here, and behind me literally everything is charred. It's actually quite hard to even talk because the air is still smelling very acrid. It's still full of smoke, and I'm just going to try to walk around and show you the scale of the destruction there behind me. That's where the plane crashed, but literally there's a row of buildings, about I've counted 5 or 6 of them, that have been completely charred. So the scale of devastation on the ground as well, where the crash occurred, the residential area where the crash occurred, is just massive.
Well, that's Yogita Lamai there. Let's cross live to Gatwick Airport and speak to our correspondent, Rajini Vaidyanathan, who is there for us. And Rajini, that flight had been due to land a short time ago.
Indeed, it was due to land at 6:25 p.m. But of course, events unfolded in tragedy, and we know that more than 50 British nationals were on board that plane. Now, of course, this would have been the time, Maryam, where they would have been collecting their luggage and reuniting with their families. And right now, the airport authorities here at Gatwick say they are offering all the support they can to families and friends of those who were on board. They've set up a reception centre where family members are being told they can come to get more advice and support. There are hotlines as well. Air India has a number. It's available on the BBC News website if people want to call that, and the British Consulate as well has a number that people can call for further help and advice as well. The British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has called this a devastating incident, and he has said in the last hour or so that British investigators have already been sent on their way to Gujarat to help to work out what exactly caused this disaster, Maryam.
And Rajini, this airline, Air India, this flight specifically from Ahmedabad to Gatwick was one that was used regularly by those communities within the UK and indeed those in India.
Indeed, Maryam, let's set this into context. There are around 800,000 Gujaratis living in the UK, British citizens who are of Gujarati descent. It is the largest Indian community here in the UK. And I've spoken to a number of people who say they use that flight quite often because it was a direct route taking them from London to Gujarat a very important state for them, not just for family, but also there's a lot of trade that's done between the UK and the state of Gujarat. So they use that flight quite often. Now, there are about 5 flights, I should say, a week taking off from here to Gujarat. This evening, the Air India check-in desks remain empty and deserted here at Gatwick. There was a flight that was due to take off for India as well today from here to Goa. That has been cancelled. I think the focus, of course, for the airline right now is to get support to people. But I think it's important to say, Maryam, that a lot of British Indians are deeply moved and affected by the events of today, as well, of course, as the wider British public. I've flown a lot from the UK to India, and a lot of these flights are people who are going home to meet family, or people who are coming to meet family here in the UK, and sometimes there are generations of people, grandparents, young kids and couples on those flights. And I've spoken to MPs who represent the areas where a lot of Gujaratis live, and one MP said that he knew a number of his constituents who he believed were on that plane, who were all from the same family. Of course, we're still waiting to get names of those who were on board, but really people wait here at Gatwick, and there's nervous anticipation as they're still trying to process this tragedy.
Regini, thank you very much. Well, let's cross live now to Ahmedabad and speak to our South Asia correspondent, Samira Hussain. And Samira, you're at the hospital near where the crash happened, where I assume those who have been injured have been taken today.
Well, those that have been injured, Maryam, are being taken here to the hospital just behind me, but also those that did not make it. And in fact, just around the corner from where I am is where officials are actually conducting DNA testing on the people that did not make it. And just to sort of describe the scene for you, I've only just arrived, and there's just hundreds and hundreds of people that are sort of coming towards the entrance that keep filtering just behind me, and there are more people even behind me, family members, people in the community that are just gathering to try and find out any kind of information. I mean, we heard from Regini, you know, this collective sense of grief, and that's certainly really palpable right here. I mean, this is one of the worst air crashes in Indian history, and there's a real sense here of loss and trying to come together and trying to help each other in the community. In fact, we just heard announcements that are being called to say that those family members that are here to please go to another area, and there are food and refreshments for you. I just want to remind you that also India is in the middle of a heat wave, so it's quite hot, and there have been people that have been standing here for hours. In fact, right now there was a gentleman that just handed over a bottle of water to my camerawoman. I mean, it just gives you a sense of just how much people are really trying to come together here.
Absolutely, Samira. And we know that the plane crashed on a building that housed medical students that worked at a local hospital. What more do we know about those people who were injured in that building?
Well, so we've heard from the dean of that college, who said that there were about 10 to 12 people that were inside that mess hall, so in that cafeteria, that were having lunch. And, you know, this was a few hours ago when we last spoke with her, and she said that, look, we have accounted for almost everyone, and they were not able to confirm whether or not anyone actually survived. You know, another colleague of mine was showing me some photographs from inside where that plane crashed, and they're just these incredible visuals where you see, you know, a part of the plane just above this building, and this open sort of fuselage. And in other areas, we've seen that, you know, emergency officials have taken lots of luggage and have taken the people's belongings from that plane. And so you saw piles of blue and red and black luggage all kind of piled together around with, you know, bits of the plane that has crashed. You know, it's interesting, as I was coming here, we flew from Delhi, and I was speaking with the pilot And of course, you know, the entire aviation community is really quite shocked by what has happened. And we were talking about this. Now, of course, and he does not have any firsthand knowledge, but this is him sort of speaking to me based on some of the videos that he had seen. What he was really remarking is that, you know, you saw the plane take off and it got to about 625 feet, and then it just made this slow descent. And it was clear that, you know, both engines had lost power. How that happened, what happened, of course, is going to be part of the investigation. But from what he understood from looking at that video is that it just lost power and then it just glided. And then you have to think about that these are massive, massive planes, and it was embarking on a 9-hour flight to go to London. And so the tanks were full, and I think that accounts for some of the videos that we've been seeing of that incredible explosion that you saw when the plane crashed, and just how many emergency officials were there on the ground trying to put out some of those fires. I mean, it was just really an incredible scene.
Now, we know, Samira, that the search operation is continuing overnight. What are we expecting the authorities to say over the next few hours? Do they expect to find any more survivors, or will it turn into a different kind of operation?
That's a very good question, and I think right now, you know, emergency officials here are really really focused on trying to get to, you know, the victims, and of course trying to find if there are any survivors. But of course, they already have recovered quite a few bodies, and so the challenge is to try and identify these bodies. And because of just the force of this plane crash and just the amount of fuel that was on here, you can imagine the condition in which a lot of those bodies are in. And so there's a lot of DNA testing that has to be undergone right now to try and identify the passengers, or even the students or other people within the community that may have been caught when this plane crashed, and to try and identify those bodies. And you can imagine that it is quite a grueling task for officials here, and long and painstaking, knowing full well just how many family members have gathered outside here, and of course have gathered in London to try and get any news of their loved ones.
Absolutely, and we know, of course, that teams from the UK and the US are heading to India to assist with that investigation. Samira, we're hearing that an air investigation such as this one will take many weeks, potentially even months.
Absolutely. These investigations do take a long time. There's a lot of information that they're going to have to try and gather. And again, you know, you can imagine that because of the force of this crash and just how much fuel there was, you know, it's likely going to take quite a long time, because there's just so much charred kind of remnants to go through to try and piece together exactly what has happened. And so there's certainly going to be officials that are coming from the UK and the United States, as we know, that are going to be aiding in this investigation. And, you know, unfortunately, we have reported on plane crashes before, and so there is some kind of familiarity when it comes to just how long and how painstaking some of these investigations are. And despite how much family members want to get as much information as possible, it really might take a very long time for that to happen.
Samira, thank you very much indeed. Samira Hussain there outside the hospital in Ahmedabad. As we mentioned, the Air India flight had 242 people on board. 230 were passengers, and we know that 12 people on board were crew. Of the passengers, we have been told that 169 were Indian nationals. 53 of the passengers were British. 7 of those on board were Portuguese nationals, and there was also 1 Canadian also on that plane. Well, authorities have in the last hour said that 260 people have died, including those on the flight and on the ground when the crash happened. But it has been reported that 1 man did survive the crash. The man, apparently sitting in seat 11A, is a British national named Vishwas Kumar Ramesh. This picture is from the Hindustan Times. Indian media say they've spoken to him in hospital, where they report he told them 30 seconds after takeoff there was a loud noise and then the plane crashed. It all happened so quickly. Well, we're going to look now at some incredible pictures. They appear to show Vishwash Kumar Ramesh on his feet, seemingly having suffered relatively minor injuries from that crash. We know Vishwash has a wife and a child, and the BBC understands he was born in India but has lived in the UK for many years. He said he doesn't know the whereabouts, though, of his brother AJ, who was also on board that plane. Well, let's go to another part of England now impacted by this. Let's speak to our Midlands correspondent, Navtej Johal, who is in Leicester. And Navtej, you have a little bit more information about that miraculous sole survivor, Vishwash.
That's right, Maryam. I spoke earlier to the cousin of Vishwash Ramesh Kumar. His name is AJ Valgi. He told me about the fact that Vishwash had called his family earlier today to say that he was fine, but that he had heard the blast from the plane. His main concern, though, was the whereabouts of his brother Ajay, who I was told by their cousin was sat next to him on the plane. I think you can see some of the interview that I did with his cousin now. It's been reported in Indian media that Vishwash is the only survivor of the flight. So what did he tell you on the phone?
Nothing, only said that he's fine, nothing else.
So Vishwash called the family and said he's fine?
Yeah, he's fine, I said nothing else.
And what happened to his brother, you said? He was sat with his brother on the...
Yeah, they were sitting next to each other. But we don't know what happened to his brother. We not heard anything.
Okay.
There's no any update.
Indian news is reporting that Vishwash is the only survivor of the crash.
Yes, we heard that, but we still can't say anything unless we hear it from the proper person. So.
What was it like hearing from Vishwash that he's okay? We think he's the only survivor.
I don't know. Like I said, I can't say anything about that.
Yeah. What was it like hearing that he's okay?
Yeah, at least the family's happy that he's okay, but we're still upset about the other brother.
What has this been like today? I mean, this must be so overwhelming and confusing.
Not confusing, it's absolutely upset things.
Yeah.
Not just because he's our brother, but other people as well.
Yeah.
But there's 242 people in the flight.
Yeah.
So obviously it's not good news, is it?
No, it's incredibly upsetting news.
Yeah.
Does it feel strange knowing that Vishwash is okay when all these other people have sadly lost their lives?
Like I said, I don't know if they lost their life or not. But we at least know that Vishwash is okay. So
how is Vishwash and Ajay? How is his family? How are you guys all doing?
Well, we're not doing well, are we?
No.
Like you said, people are just we're all upset. But like I said, we're still waiting on Ajay to find out what's happening with him.
And am I right in thinking that Vishwash, was he married? He had a child?
Yeah, he's got one child.
So he's got a wife and he's got a child?
Yeah.
A little boy or girl?
Yeah, boy.
Little boy?
Yeah.
And he's here?
Yeah, they are here. Yeah.
But he's called and said he's okay?
Yeah, he's fine.
Ajay, how are you doing? This is your cousin who... One of whom is
absolutely upset.
Yeah.
Just not my cousin, he's also one of my best friends as well. So I'm feeling upset. Yeah.
How are his wife and child doing?
I don't know, not seen them yet. I've not met them. I don't know. Everyone is upset about it.
And Maryam, a short while ago, in addition to his cousin, I also had a long conversation and an interview with his brother, the younger brother of what we believe is the sole survivor, Vishwash Ramesh Kumar. And his brother told me that they are still, of course, relieved about what it seems has happened with Vishwash, but still incredibly concerned and worried about their other brother, Ajay, who we were told was sat next to Vishwash on that plane. And that appears to be the family's key focus at the moment. There's a huge amount of support for that family here in Leicester as well. We saw relatives, we saw neighbours, we saw people who don't even know the family but just want to be there with them, support them as well-wishers as well. And that community appears to be coming together tonight over this tragedy.
Navtej, thank you. Well, the identities of the passengers on board the Air India flight have not yet been made public, but there are concerns that the British Gujarati community could be disproportionately affected. Bob Blackman, the Conservative MP for Harrow East, which has one of the largest British Gujarati populations in the UK, has said some families in his constituency are among those with victims.
Yes, well, obviously all of us are thoughts and prayers are with the relatives and friends of those that may almost certainly have lost their lives on this terrible crash. There's a section of vigils taking place. One took place earlier this afternoon at one of the local temples. There's another one at another temple later tonight. I've been alerted to the fact that that 4 of the workers at one of the temples in my constituency very sadly have lost more than 4 relatives who were on the flight. They've had the communication to them very sadly.
Let's get more reaction from Harrow now, and our senior UK correspondent Seema Kotecha is at a Hindu temple there. And Seema, what's been happening there this evening?
Well, we've been hearing how there's a real sense of loss in India, but there is also a deep sense of loss at this temple in Harrow in Middlesex. We've been sitting inside for a couple of hours now, watching around 100 or so Hindu worshippers pray for those who were killed and injured. And what is really striking is by speaking to them, they've told us that they know people who are on that flight. Several people in the temple told us that they know of people who were on that flight. One lady was sobbing as she told me that she can't believe he's gone. She said that he was here very recently. This was somebody that she knows very well. She called him a member of her family, and she said she really can't fathom that he is no longer here. She hasn't had any official confirmation yet, but she was just conveying the distraught that she and many others are feeling here at this time. Now, the congregation is being served some food here on my right-hand side as the prayers have just come to an end inside. Now, the food is to wish them well, to help them with their prayer, to help them feel better. It's often given at Hindu temples, and what's really important from the community here is what they really want to get through is that they are saying that the time we have at the moment is to support the entire community and not just one community. This is not just about the Gujarati community, they say. This is about all communities affected by this crash, but also communities around the world who are also going through very difficult times, whether it's in the Middle East or beyond. And that's something they're really eager to convey. But I think it's going to be an incredibly difficult time, and like many around the world, they're still struggling to come to terms with what happened. And I think, you know, some still really don't believe that it has happened. And as the news seeps in, I think they will, you know, eventually manage to come to terms with it. But it is an incredibly difficult time also here in the UK for a community that is very large.
Of course it is. Seema, thank you very much indeed. Seema Kotecha. Well, leaders from around the world have reacted with shock to the scenes from Ahmedabad. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi posted on X saying that he was stunned and saddened by the news. "It is heartbreaking beyond words," he wrote. "My thoughts are with everyone affected." Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has been speaking in the last hour.
Well, the images and news from India is absolutely devastating, and I speak for the entire country in saying our thoughts are with each and every one of those involved. There will be British and Indian families across the land who are absolutely impacted by this, and our thoughts first and foremost are with them. Obviously the investigation is going on. We've dispatched an investigation team that's been deployed. The Foreign Secretary is leading on this, and we'll obviously update as soon as we can. But we're working with the Indian authorities on this to establish the facts. I would say to all families, friends of anybody affected to please contact the Foreign Office for further information.
Are you in contact at all with any affected families, and do you know anything more about this possible British survivor? And if I may, is there going to any plans for a Cobra?
Well, in relation to the question of a survivor, obviously we're establishing the facts and the investigation is ongoing. We're in constant contact with the Indian authorities. We've dispatched our own team that's been acknowledged to work with them. I think it is important for all friends and family to contact the Foreign Office so we can roll out this as quickly as possible. But it is an ongoing investigation. It'll take some time. But, you know, our hearts and our thoughts are absolutely with the friends and families of all those affected who are going to be absolutely devastated by this awful news.
And on the last couple of hours, India's Minister of Home Affairs has been speaking. He told reporters he'd met with the sole survivor of the crash. These pictures showing that meeting at the hospital.
इस विमान में Altogether, 230 passengers, national and international citizens, and 12 crew members were on board. We have had news of one person among them surviving. I have gone to meet that person. We will give the official death toll after the DNA is taken and their identities have been confirmed by the authorities. But I have gone to see the survivor.
Well, King Charles has also spoken of his shock at the crash. He posted this: "Our special prayers and deepest possible sympathy are with the families and friends of all those affected by this appallingly tragic incident across so many nations as they await news of their loved ones." Well, let's bring in our correspondent, Will Vernon, who's outside the Indian High Commission in London. And Will, what have people there been saying to you today?
Well, officials here, Maryam, are saying they're doing everything they can to help the families, the UK-based families of those on board flight AI 171. A little bit earlier, we had a statement from the High Commission of India in London that said they're committed to providing all possible assistance to the next of kin of victims during this moment of profound grief. And they urged people to follow official government channels. They also provided a special number, a hotline for people to call if they need emergency visa assistance, if they need to travel to India. That number is 07768 765 035. Now, as we've been hearing, there were 169 Indian nationals on board, 53 British citizens. Many of them, of course, will have relatives here in the UK, and we understand that a number of relatives have got in contact today with the High Commission and emergency visas have been issued, but also many relatives, of course, will either have Indian passports or they'll have Indian overseas citizen cards, which means they won't require a visa to travel to India. But I've also been speaking to ordinary Indians who have been here today on other unrelated matters, and they've been telling me about their sadness, their shock. Devastating was a word that one lady used. Many people expressing surprise that this happened, bearing in mind that aviation safety has improved, they said, so much in recent years. I was speaking to one Indian businessman here a little bit earlier who was talking about the very strong business links between Ahmedabad and the UK. He said he would expect many people involved in the world of business to have been on that flight. And he said the entire Indian community in the UK would be affected by this tragedy. And that is, of course, an enormous community, as we've been hearing, isn't it? Around 2 million people identify as Indian British in the UK. It's one of the largest ethnic groups in the country. And as well as those strong economic and business links, there are also deep historical ties, cultural connections as well. There's substantial communities, not just, as we've been hearing a little bit earlier, here in London, but across the country, in the Midlands in particular. So the whole Indian community affected by this tragedy.
Will, thank you. Well, let's take you through some more footage now of that crash that the BBC has verified. This time, we believe, from the airport itself, showing the full short flight of the Air India plane, which we're about to show you now. And a warning, this does include the final moments of the plane. You can clearly see from this angle how the aircraft comes into shot as it picks up speed along the airport runway. As it accelerates along the tarmac, we lose sight of it briefly. As the jet lifts off, it starts to then gain altitude. It briefly but slowly appears to climb. You can see the wheels there below the craft. But then, after 30 or 40 seconds, the climb stops and the plane levels out, and then it starts to drop, falling down towards those buildings in the background. Now, we know the impact was in a built-up area. Once again, we lose sight of the Boeing Dreamliner as it continues to lose altitude. We see as it falls towards that catastrophic impact and subsequent explosion of this fully laid and fully fueled flight, which is where the footage ends. Well, let's take a look a bit more closely now at what could have been happening in the cockpit at that time. Joining me now is former 747 BA pilot and aviation consultant Alistair Rosenshine. Alistair, good to talk to you, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. Just talk me through your thoughts on what we saw there in that video and what we know so far about this tragedy.
Well, that video is the main source of information that we have on this accident. So, as you described it, the aircraft accelerated down the runway, it then rotated. That's when the pilots pull the control column back, or the handling pilot, that is, and the aircraft then leaves the ground and starts its climb. At that point, the aircraft should be pitched up, and within 3 to 4 seconds of it leaving the ground, the call will be made to retract the gear. Now, the gear wasn't retracted. You can clearly see that in the video. The gear remained down, and this is extremely unusual. The gear is never left down on after a takeoff. So one must wonder what actually happened on the flight deck. Was there hydraulic failure, or was there possibility that instead of retracting the gear, the flaps were retracted? Now that would fit all the evidence that you can see in that video. So if the flaps were retracted, they would come up slowly. It would allow the aircraft still to climb whilst there's still some flaps, and then it would level off, and then because the aircraft be flying below what we call the clean speed, the clean air speed, that's where the aircraft flies with the flaps fully up, it would cause the aircraft to lose lift and start to descend. You can see that the aircraft's being held in the correct attitude, pitched up, as if it was climbing, and that's what one would expect the handling pilot to do. But you can also just about notice that the aircraft's wallowing a little bit. The wings are, it's got a little bit of roll to the left, then to the right, and that would suggest that it's lost flying speed, and that's the reason why it's descending. So, that is a possible cause of the accident, but there are other ones. It looks like it's a loss of lift or a loss of engine power. I mean, they're the two main things that would cause an aircraft to come down like this.
And of course, Alistair, the investigation will begin, and that will take much time to reveal any reasons behind this crash. But let me ask you this. We heard that there was a mayday call issued by the pilot before the plane crashed. What does that tell us about what was going on inside the cockpit in those seconds?
Well, it's an unusual thing to do, to make a radio call in such a dire emergency. I mean, it really was a serious emergency. You only make a radio call when you've got time. The first thing you do is you fly the aircraft, and then, of course, you control where it's going, navigate, and then finally you make a radio call. So you would make a mayday call if you want help from the ground. Now, looking at this accident, the only sort of help they could have asked for was a return back to land on the takeoff runway. I don't know what the words were in the mayday, but clearly they recognised that there was a serious problem at that point, and that's the reason why you make a mayday call. So, it looks like loss of power, loss of lift, and the aircraft came down. But all this will become known when they get the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, both of which known as to the layperson as the black boxes. They're in fact orange. They're usually in the rear hold of the aircraft, and they should be able to find them. I mean, it is a cluttered accident site with all the buildings, and so it's a mixture of street furniture and of parts of building, and of course the aircraft itself.
And Alistair, what will those boxes tell us?
Oh, they'll tell you everything that was said on the flight deck, all the radio calls that were heard on the flight deck, noises on the flight deck too. So that would be the cockpit voice recorder side, and it would also let you know if somebody had entered the flight deck, for example. Then you've got the flight data recorder, and that's a really important one because that shows the position of all the flying controls, the position of the throttles, the engine power that's being produced, the rate of climb, the direction the aircraft's heading in, and all the other systems and failures. It really is very, very detailed. And it's designed to survive a major crash, as this one was. And so they will be able to recreate the flight in detail. And once they've programmed it into a simulator, the flight will then be flown by the simulator, and the accident investigators should be able to find out the primary, secondary, tertiary causes of this accident.
Alistair Rosenshine, it's been really interesting to talk to you. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us with your analysis.
Thank you very much.
Well, details of the plane's final moments and images from footage from the crash site are still emerging. BBC Verify's Merlin Thomas has been looking at what we know so far. Merlin.
Here at BBC Verify, we spent the day poring over footage of the plane crash, the moments before the crash, as well as the aftermath. And we've been speaking to experts who've been examining the footage for clues to find out what might have happened. This is the journey of the Air India jet, which crashed moments after takeoff in Ahmedabad. The plane, a Boeing 7878 Dreamliner, takes off from Ahmedabad Airport at 13:38 local time, bound for London Gatwick. Tracking website Flight Radar 24 shows the last location of flight tracking data at 625 feet altitude here. And these are the final moments of the plane before it crashes, filmed flying low over residential neighbourhoods before crashing with 242 people on board. Experts say that the plane appears to be pitching up to try to gain altitude. This is the aftermath. Some of the wreckage is just over 1.5 kilometres from the end of the runway. The tail is only a few hundred metres from the main hospital building. We know where this is because we've matched these buildings and aftermath to publicly available photos from the scene. The building that was hit is part of the BJ Medical College, one of Gujarat's largest government-run medical institutions. It's one of the oldest medical colleges in the entire country. At least 50 medical students have been taken to hospital. The Dreamliner 7878 has been in operation with Air India since 2014. So what could be the possible cause?
For some reason, enough lift wasn't being generated to keep the aircraft climbing. That's usually associated with not enough thrust for some reason or another. But more than stating that would be to get into the realms of speculation.
Some experts told BBC Verify the plane's wing flaps didn't appear to be extended, which could be a factor which led to the crash. But others disagreed. Now people wait anxiously, hoping to find answers amongst the wreckage. Merlin Thomas, BBC News.
Well, let's take you back now to Ahmedabad and speak to our South Asia correspondent, Samira Hussain. And Samira, many hours now after that crash, which happened about 1:30 in the afternoon local time, people, I'm sure, are still taking in this sheer scale of this tragedy.
Absolutely. You know, I had a chance to sort of walk around and talk to a few people that have come together outside the hospital, and I spoke with one person who was saying that he's come on behalf of family in the UK, that actually it was his friend that was on the flight. He was seated in row 17, and he had actually come from the UK to perform the final rites for his father, who had died at the end of May. And he was flying back to go to the UK, which is where his wife is. And we now understand that the wife is in fact pregnant, but they have no information about what has happened to this person. And so he's here on behalf of the family that's in the UK that, you know, are just desperate to find out any kind of information. And people have been standing out here for just hours and hours. And just to sort of make it, you understand just the kind of scene here. There's traffic everywhere. There's hundreds and hundreds of people. And India is going through a heat wave at the moment. So even though it's evening time, the heat is really quite intense. And so you even have volunteers that are handing out water bottles to people to try and keep people hydrated. It's just such an incredible scene. Now, Maryam, I actually want to bring in a guest that I have with me. Tulsi Bhai Bhil is a vendor that was operating just outside this hospital. And आप बताइए कि आपने क्या देखा है? I'm asking him, what is it that he saw?
सिविल के सामने मेरा व्यवसाय है टीका, और हमने यहाँ से देखा कि सिविल में बहुत बड़ी आग लगी है. तो मैं मेरे बुलेट लेके वहाँ पहुँचा. मेरे बुलेट लेके पहुँचा वहाँ पे, तो सिविल में नहीं कि उसके पीछे आग लगी है.
So what he's saying is that he found actually that there was fumes. He saw these big flames, and he thought it was actually the hospital that had caught on fire. And when he came here into the hospital, he realized it actually wasn't here. It was further ahead. तो फिर क्या हुआ?
तो पीछे हमने पीछे गए तो देखा कि भाई यहाँ पे लंदन का प्लेन आ रहा है, प्लेन क्रैश हुआ है। तो हम वहाँ जाके देखा तो पूरा प्लेन क्रैक हो गया और वहाँ से हमने बॉडी निकाली। तो एक जन का तो हाथ मेरे हाथ में आ गया, पैर मेरे हाथ में आ गया। बॉडी ऐसी थी कि हम खुद डर गए कि क्या हुआ ये। और
So he's saying now that actually he went to the crash site and he was one of the first people that was there. He saw that, you know, actually a plane had crashed, and he said that him and other people had actually gone there and they tried to take out the bodies of those that were at that crash site. And in fact, as he tried to pull people, their limbs came apart in his hands. और उसके बाद क्या हुआ?
उसके बाद हम वहाँ पहुँचे, तुरंत हमने सेवा में कार्य किया। यहाँ पे आए तो सब बॉडी बहुत थी तो हम लेके अंदर गए। उनका चेहरा ही नहीं दिख रहे थे कि कौन है, पता ही नहीं था। उनका बहुत हालत खराब थी।
He's just describing what happened next, that he came here to the hospital and that there were several bodies that were being brought into the hospital, and just the condition of the bodies, I mean, there's a real sense of shock at the condition of those bodies, that he saw those bodies coming in. Remember that this was a jet that was going to fly 9 hours, and so it was going with, you know, a pretty full tank of fuel, and that's why the crash site and the fire that ignited is just so intense, and that's really what made it so, it's making it so difficult for people to be able to identify the bodies. Aapka bahut dhanyawad, shukriya. Maryam, back to you.
Samira, thank you very much indeed, and that eyewitness giving us a very graphic account of what he saw in the aftermath of that crash. Let's take you live now to Ahmedabad, and these are pictures that are coming into us at BBC News, and we're seeing here the mangled wreckage of the plane. You can still see wisps of smoke floating over the wreckage as a couple of rescue workers wearing face masks walk slowly past. You can see the red wiring and the black wreckage parts of the plane that have basically fallen through or past the building and have burnt and are behind those trees. You can see in the foreground a number of people walking and talking around there, as well as emergency service cars and tractors that have been used potentially to try to excavate through the wreckage. Also, you can see members of the military walking past as well. They of course would have been helping out today with that very, very difficult and intense rescue operation. As you can see there, the local time is 12 minutes past midnight, and the crash itself happened around about 1:34 in the afternoon. So it's now over 11 hours since the plane crash happened. We'll of course take you live to Ahmedabad when we get more pictures here at BBC News. But the question now is, what more do we know about the plane that was involved? Well, the aircraft that crashed is a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner. Here it is. The model was launched by the US company around about 14 years ago and started flying with Air India in 2014, with 256 seats available on board. It's the first time it's been involved in a crash like this. Just 6 weeks ago, the manufacturer's Boeing celebrated the craft's carrying 1 billion passengers globally. Air India operates a fleet of more than 190 planes. 58 of them are Boeing. 34 of those are believed to be Dreamliners. Well, this is file footage of the same plane that crashed today, taken back in 2016. In a statement, Boeing CEO said this: "Our deepest condolences go out to the loved ones of the passengers and crew on board Air India Flight 171, as well as everyone affected in Ahmedabad. I've spoken with Air India's chairman to offer our full support, and a Boeing team stands ready to support the investigation led by India's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau." Well, US and British investigators are now travelling to India to assist the investigation into this crash, with specialists from across the world expected to help. Well, let's cross live now and speak to our North America business correspondent, Michelle Fleury. Michelle, we saw there the celebrations of 1 billion Dreamliner passengers from Boeing, but to be honest, it hasn't been a very easy few years for Boeing, and this will really sting the company.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were, some safety concerns in recent years around the 787 Dreamliner that had been raised by whistleblowers who had sort of questioned some of the assembly processes and the quality of the titanium that was used in the plane. Regulators here had investigated, looked into that, and sort of had seemingly not come up with anything. But this particular plane was 11 years old, and overall the 787 Dreamliner has a very strong track record. And so I think many people looking at this are sort of somewhat surprised and are waiting to find out what the answers will be here as to why this happened. But right now many questions remain. Notably, was this a failure of maintenance? Was this a mechanical failure? Was this human error? At this point, we just don't know. But of course, all of this raises questions about the safety record of Boeing because of crashes that date back to 2018 and 2019. Now, they involve completely different planes. They involve the 737 MAX. In those instances, there was a software flaw that was resolved. Then there were questions about sort of assembly at some of its plants, how strong the safety record was there. And, if you listen to airline executives, if you listen to American regulators, if you listen to Boeing, all of them were saying that the company had made huge strides in the last several months, particularly under the leadership of the new CEO, Kelly Ortberg. But of course, incidents like this bring all of that history back to mind. And so again, you're seeing the share price under pressure, down around 5% at the moment.
Michelle, thank you. We heard earlier from the cousin of Vishwash Kumar Ramesh, the British man who has survived the crash. These pictures here, you can see Vishwash walking away from the Air India flight where he's believed to have been on board in seat 11A. Well, he's now in hospital where he's been visited by India's Minister of Home Affairs. Well, let's return to Leicester and speak to our Midlands correspondent, Navtej Johal. Navtej, you've been speaking to Vishwash's family this evening. Tell me more.
That's right, Maryam. Earlier you saw my interview with Vishwash's cousin. We understand Vishwash is as far as we're aware so far, the sole survivor from that plane crash in Ahmedabad. But sat next to him was his brother Ajay as well, and his whereabouts are currently unknown. Now, about an hour or so ago now, I had an interview with the younger brother of those two, Nayan Kumar Ramesh, who told me a little bit about the situation, what they know so far, how they're feeling. And this is the interview that we filmed with him. I started, though, by showing him the images that you've seen a moment ago of his brother Vishwash in hospital meeting the Indian Home Affairs Minister.
Yeah, obviously it feels great seeing him doing well. It's fine, I guess. He's just more worried about the other brother. That's all.
Tell me a little bit about your brothers.
I could just go on and on, I guess, all day. There's no words to describe them, to be honest.
They're quite a bit older than you, I think, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
What are they like as brothers?
I don't even know what to say. I don't know what to say about them. I have no words.
How are you feeling right now? There must be so much going through your mind, through your heart.
Yeah, I feel, pardon my language, but I feel like absolutely That's pretty much it.
You've got amazing support around you here. You said to me earlier, these are a lot of people who are your relatives, your cousins. What does it mean to you to have this support from not just your family, your relatives, but also the community of Leicester?
Obviously it feels great knowing that there's people out there that care about my family, giving us support. So yeah, it feels nice.
How are your parents?
Parents are pretty much the same since they've heard the news.
How were you this morning, I think, or earlier today when you first heard what happened?
Yeah, we were all in shock as soon as we heard what happened. Just utter shock, that's all. Speechless.
And I think you might have spoken, or one of your relatives might have spoken to Vishwash earlier. Has he said anything about what happened to him?
Oh, I'm not sure about that. I don't have no idea about that.
What has Vishwash told you about what happened to him so far?
Honestly, he himself has no idea, like how he survived, how he got out of the plane. Well, when he called us, he was just more worried about my other brother, like, just find Ajay, find Ajay. That's all he cares about at the moment.
That's his concern, that's all he wants, is to find your brother.
He doesn't care about himself.
Well, you heard the relief about Vishvash and the fact that he is currently in hospital, that he has survived that plane crash, but also the tremendous concern about the other brother, Ajay, who we understand was sat next to him. There is an enormous amount of support here for the family in Leicester. As you saw a moment ago there, the community has rallied around that family, but that concern is very much there about what the fate is of their brother Ajay.
Navtej, thank you. Well, the aviation industry is now facing major questions over safety and exactly how this could happen. Dr. Hassan Shahidi is the president and chief executive of the Flight Safety Foundation, a non-profit which advocates for aviation safety. Dr. Shahidi, thank you very much for joining us. And let me ask you, first of all, for your reaction to this air disaster.
Yeah, well, our hearts go out to the families and loved ones of those that were lost in the flight, as well as those on the ground. This was a terrible accident, and miraculously, we have one person that survived on the flight, and it is just terrible. It's heartbreaking to hear the stories, and also to the rescue teams that are on site trying to find other victims or those that are injured and get them to hospital. This is a very difficult crash site.
And of course, the investigation will be a difficult one too.
Absolutely, because it is unsafe for investigators to go into the crash site. Right now, there's fuel there that has to be taken care of. There is the building that's unstable. So a lot of work has to be done to make it possible for the investigators to actually enter there and begin their investigation.
Dr. Shahidi, it's been good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us. And as Dr. Shahidi said there, the investigation will and potentially could take many weeks or even months after it begins. So how could this tragedy have happened? Let's speak now to Terry Tozer. He's a former pilot and the author of Why Planes Crash. Terry, thank you for your time. And let me ask you, first of all, of course, it's very, very early days, but what are your thoughts about this air crash disaster?
Well, apart from the horror of it, the information has been kind of evolving, and my view of why it might have happened has done likewise. I wasn't sure when I saw the first images that the aircraft had takeoff flaps selected, but the video quality is not that good, and subsequently with a better sound quality, I saw the aircraft descending over the houses before it crashed, and I couldn't really hear much in the way of jet thrust. And so, you know, the two things you need for a successful takeoff are thrust and lift. Now, it could be either one or even both of those that were either missing or severely degraded. There are a number of possible scenarios, but obviously at the moment it is all pretty much conjecture from limited information.
So what do you mean by the jet and the thrust? How can you tell that those haven't or hadn't been in use at that time? Was it purely from the sound level?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much all of us know what a jet aeroplane sounds like when it's taking off. The one that we saw departing in the video, and I have to say again, they're not that great quality, but the takeoff roll started looking okay. It left the ground and appeared to climb away. And then it sank until it obviously crashed. Now, as the mobile phone footage of it going overhead, it sounded almost like the engines were operating at less than optimal thrust. It's not exactly a scientific assessment, but if there were some reason for the aircraft thrust not being optimal, that would account for that. Equally, if the flap settings weren't sufficient, the aircraft wouldn't be getting enough lift. So it could be either of those things. It could be neither, or it could be both. But on the face of it, it didn't sound quite right to me anyway.
So, I mean, something like this, for something like this to happen over such a built-up area, how unusual is that?
Well, it's very unusual. I mean, obviously, any built-up area at the end of a runway is going to be at risk, and we've seen other instances where that's had a poor outcome. For a modern airliner, and there's nothing wrong with the Dreamliner, it was the MAX that had all the controversy. For a modern airliner, they are required to lose an engine at the most critical point of takeoff and still be able to continue safely. And for one to lose both engines or to lose less than maximum thrust is extremely unusual. There are reasons why that might have occurred. And I've seen press reports from India saying that bird strikes were involved. Now, these aircraft are certified to take a certain amount of bird strike. And what we've seen in other cases is that you do need a really large flock of quite substantial birds to seriously affect an aircraft of this type. So, I couldn't see any evidence of that in the very limited videos we've got.
Terry Tozer, thank you for speaking to us this evening.
You're welcome.
Well, let's recap what's happened today. Police say more than 200 people have died in the crash. That's passengers and those on the ground. These pictures, verified by the BBC, show the moment the Boeing 7878 Dreamliner came down. You can see there, as we were talking to Terry, the jet losing altitude above a built-up area close to the airport's runway before disappearing from view. Shortly after, a huge explosion can be seen. Well, flight AI 171 was due to fly from the city in the west of India to London's Gatwick Airport, arriving at around 6:25 this evening, BST. The flight was recorded picking up speed at around 1:34 in the afternoon local time. That's around 9 a.m. in the UK. The aircraft then started to climb, but the last signal was sent just 4 minutes later. Air traffic control say they received a mayday call from the plane, and that was the last contact before the crash. Local police say the plane hit a hostel that was housing doctors in a residential area close to the airport. At least 50 medical students have been taken to hospital. Well, pictures from the ground show pieces of the Boeing's jet fuselage and tail sticking out of buildings and wings and wheels lying in the wreckage of damaged and destroyed buildings. Emergency helpline numbers have been set up for those that need information on the flights. Air India have a number for those in India. It's 1-800-5691-444. There's also a number for foreign nationals too. That's 0091-806-277-920. And the UK's Foreign Office has a line for British nationals, 0207 008 5000. And of course, for those of you following, you can go onto the website to read more about what is happening. That concludes our special coverage of the devastating plane crash in India. We will now leave you with some of those tragic images from throughout this day.